There we go. Over to you, Eva. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. So, hello everyone, and thank you for all turning up at such a sensible time of day. I did a talk to a different parent group last night after a very long day in tribunal, and by 10 o'clock, when I was still going on Q&As last night, I was really ready for wine, but I'm not allowed to have any because I'm just about to do a kidney transplant donation to my daughter who has systemic lupus. That has caused kidney failure. So I couldn't even console myself with any wine. So it'll just be coffee for this morning. But I've decided to call this talk this morning "No More School Drama" because I think that there's a strong possibility that might resonate with some of you, what you're either experiencing now that you've moved on to education otherwise than at school, or that you are hoping to achieve moving forward. So I'm going to talk about, just in very quick and broad terms, a child with SEND's rights and entitlements, because I think that it's always empowering to have a general understanding of what your child is entitled to. I'm going to talk about the parental duty to educate, elective home education, because that's what EOTAS is definitely not. It's not education otherwise than at school to have elective home education. I'm going to talk about interim education, which again is not EOTAS, but it's important to be aware of if you're in circumstances where your child doesn't yet have an education, health and care plan. I'm going to talk about your child being out of school and having an education, health and care plan and the right to the provision that's in that, even if there's no formal agreement to education otherwise than at school. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about more of the nuts and bolts of education otherwise than at school and relevant legal provisions. I think that this has already been covered to an extent in what's been said already this morning. But just to be really clear, I'm not giving you specific legal advice today about your individual case, because even if it sounds like I'm saying something to you in response to a question really clearly and quite individually, of course, I don't know the broader circumstances of the case, and I haven't read any background documents which might have an impact on any legal advice that I would give. So this should be helpful to you, but it's just not quite the same as individual specific legal advice. So I don't think that anybody would disagree that education is hugely important. You know, it's a force, can be a great force for good. It has the power to bring about great change. But our education system itself is not always fit for purpose. And that's because it simply wasn't designed with all of the different expressions of humanness in mind. And many of the things that are valued in a school setting and rewarded, like the ability to sit still and concentrate and be polite and abide by the rules, are actually really difficult for many children, particularly those, for example, who are neurodivergent. And the problem with that, the problem with trying to fit a square peg of a child into the round hole of the education system is not that the hammering is hard work, though I appreciate it might be. It's because you risk destroying the peg, destroying that child's self-esteem, their sense of self-efficacy as a learner. And increasingly, we see many, many examples of difficult experiences at school leading to quite significant mental health difficulties. We see incidents of self-harming, eating disorders, and high levels of anxiety and school refusal. And it's my view that it's far easier to build strong children than it is to mend broken adults. So my job as an education lawyer then is about squaring the circle, making the education system more fit for purpose. And in broad terms, that's usually securing school placements or education otherwise than at school placements for children and young people so that they can get the education, health and social care provision that they need. And so that parents are supported to overcome some of the challenges they might face navigating what can become quite a complicated legal, medical and education system. Now, there's a huge irony in my being an education lawyer because my first contact with the education law system, unbeknown to me at the time, was when I was first permanently excluded from school at the age of 11. And I would then spend the next 4 or 5 years as a NEET, so not in education, employment or training, mainly hanging around on the streets, learning all sorts of transferable skills that would stand me in good stead for when I would later qualify as a criminal lawyer. But it was necessity really that brought me to education law whilst I was parenting 3 children, all of whom have one form of special educational needs or another, both physical needs in the case of my daughter that I mentioned that I was about to donate a kidney to, but also my sons who are neurodivergent. One of my children had a SEND statement because it was that long ago, and another one of them had an education, health and care plan. And it was that one, the youngest, the ADHDer, who really was the hardest to get through the education system with. But in my experience, having a powerful enough why for doing something will often equip you with the how eventually. And that's really led me to having to become an actual expert in education law in order to get my son from being excluded at the age of 6 and 9 to going off with a very good set of exam results to university. So I said I would mention a child with SEND's rights and entitlements. And broadly speaking, it's the right to SEND support if you're in a state school and reasonable adjustments. It's the likely right to an education, health and care needs assessment. Almost all children with SEN will meet the very low threshold for an education, health and care needs assessment. The possible right to an EHC plan, and then a conditional right to either your preferred school or a conditional right to education otherwise than at school in that EHC plan once issued. And of course, I'll be speaking more about that later. It's importantly the right to have the provisions specified in that, particularly in section F of that EHC plan. And importantly, the right to suitable full-time education unless the child is medically unfit to receive that. And that's the interim education I'll be speaking about. The right to health and social care assessments and possibly some care and respite provision. Importantly, the protection from harm. One of the reasons that parents often decide not to send their children to school is to safeguard them from harm. The right to freedom from discrimination. There are lots of different types of discrimination, but particularly disability discrimination. And also the right to freedom from inhumane and degrading treatment, and to a fair trial, which can be very relevant to some of the things that I would consider unsatisfactory and unsuitable that happen in school settings. So we don't often think about human rights in schools and fair trials as being an education issue, but actually there are processes that need to be fair. And there is treatment of children that can sometimes happen in school, like long periods of isolation and segregation that can be humiliating and degrading. Centrally is the right to have a child's best interests at the centre of and the primary consideration in all decisions that concern them. And there is also, when it's relevant and helpful, the right to obtain data about your child from a school or local authority, and to data rectification where the information being held is inaccurate. So, a parent does not have to send their child to school, save for exceptional circumstances that usually involve a court order. A parent does have to ensure that their child receives suitable and usually full-time education. So that means that a child has to receive some kind of education, and it's not actually very prescriptive what that looks like, but they don't have to attend school. However, if you have your child still on a school roll somewhere on the school register somewhere and they're not regularly attending school, you may be committing a criminal offence. And so the answer to that, if you want to avoid a criminal offence and you don't want to send your child to school, is to remove them from the school register. And I can explain how to do that if anyone wants to know the answer. Some of the reasons people have for wanting to educate their child otherwise than at school are kind of philosophical, religious, political, more kind of lifestyle, ideological choices about, how they want to bring their children up. It's very often disillusionment with the school system having tried it. It's often safeguarding reasons or health reasons. It can often be exclusion, like formal exclusion or off-rolling of children. There may just be no suitable school to meet the child's needs, or school might not be reasonably accessible for the particular child, sometimes because of anxiety, or there might be an ongoing dispute with the school. So elective home education is where you make effectively a lifestyle choice not to send your children to school, to educate them at home. And I put up the details there, which I won't read out, but that when the circumstances arise and what provision you can use to remove your child from the school role. But basically, you send an email to the school saying, the child is no longer attending school. I'm going to electively home educate. Please remove them from the school role. They have to be removed from the school role if they're attending an ordinary mainstream school. If they're attending a specialist school, then the local authority have to be consulted and they have to consent, but they can't unreasonably withhold their consent, and you can escalate the matter if they do withhold their consent. So that's a lifestyle choice. That's elective home education. And sometimes local authorities like to tell you that you're electively home educating your child by choice, when actually you're not electively home educating, because it doesn't seem to be a choice. It seems to be because there's no other option. And those are two different things. If you're electively home educating, then the local authority has no duty to support and fund anything you do. There is some quite recent statutory guidance, which I've included a link to there on the slides, that sets out things that local authorities can do to monitor what's going on in the home education side of their community, and to potentially support parents in that situation. But there's no obligation to fund anything that parents are doing, like education or therapy, etc. So interim education. So I mentioned that I spent a lot of time out in the educational wilderness, not receiving any education. And it took a very long time for both education welfare and social services to catch up with me, at which point they decided that I needed sort of safety and security in a secure assessment centre, which didn't really feel very warm, fuzzy or friendly at all, and was actually a horrible place where children seemed to be growing up on kind of damage and surviving on rage. What should have happened is that the local authority, on seeing that a child is out of school because of exclusion or medical reasons or otherwise reasons, which might be there's no suitable school. It's often where no school will take a child, for example, because of their behaviour, or it's where a child is too anxious to attend school. The local authority must secure suitable and full-time education for that child. And that usually might look like some kind of alternative pupil referral provision, but it can also look like home tuition where tutors come home. It could be online, for example, and there are a number of organisations that can provide that support externally, as well as some local authorities having their own kind of bank of tutors and teachers that support that kind of provision. And that is a statutory duty. So the local authority must do that. There are many inclusion or exclusion officers, or whatever they like to call themselves these days, in local authority education teams, who will say, oh, fine, we'll give you 2 hours a week of tuition. That is not suitable full-time education. The only time less than full-time, so what a child of the same age is receiving if they were to attend school, is okay, is when there is evidence from a medical doctor that says this child is medically unfit to either attend, not just to attend school, but medically unfit to receive education full time. So, if your child has ADHD or autism, for example, it's unlikely they're unfit to receive education for those reasons. They're not actually unwell. If a child has, chronic fatigue syndrome, or is undergoing aggressive chemotherapy treatment and is, asleep most of the day, then they may be unfit to receive education full time. So, and I should say, just on interim education, is that a child has a right to this whether they have an EHCP or they don't have an EHCP. So this is just for all children regardless. But when a child has an EHCP, and they're not in school, then they have the right to all of the provision that's specified in Section F of their plan. Now, Section F is the education provision section of a plan, and it might be written on the basis that the child is anticipated to attend a school, but it will also have other things in it, for example, speech and language therapy or occupational therapy, which are kind of can be delivered outside of a school setting. And any provision that's in Section F, the local authority has a duty to deliver. That's Section 42 of the Children and Families Act. And so if a child is not receiving it, you can, often needing to use pre-action protocol letters for judicial review, force the local authority to deliver that provision moving forward. And what that might mean paying you a personal budget to pay private therapists, for example, or for private tuition, or it might mean the local authority organising its own therapists or paying private therapists, etc., to support the child. But that provision must be delivered. And if it hasn't been delivered for a long period of time, I know of lots of children that are out of education with an EHCP and receiving nothing, then you can also make a retrospective complaint in relation to periods of missed education and periods of missed special educational provision, and seek financial recompense for that. Firstly, by way of complaint to the local authority for that missed provision, as well as a few other things, and ultimately to the local government and social care ombudsman. And a good place to start if you're looking at what sort of money you might be entitled to is the local government and social care ombudsman's guidance on remedies, and that's a useful starting point. So I've included here, and hopefully it's come out okay, it looks a little bit fuzzy on my screen, an example of an actual timetable for an education otherwise than at school package for a child. So this is a funded package, and the details of it don't look like this in the child's EHC plan, but are listed in Section F of the child's EHC plan. Section I of the child's EHC plan is blank because there's no placement to be attended. And this is an example of a child's EOTAS package where there are several hours of sort of core teaching, English, math, science. There is therapeutic provision, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, zones of regulation, social skills. And there's also physical education, because remember the national curriculum includes a recommended 2 hours a week of physical activity. So there's swimming, and in this case, there happens to be karate because it's quite individualized for the particular child's interests. And there's also things like life skills, so community trips. Of course, that's kind of dependent on the age of the child and the needs of the child. And here we've got food tech as well. So that's an example, and it's a costed example, which I'm not sure if all of the costs are included in this particular one, but it sets out kind of if you went to a private tuition company, if you went to, and they can really vary in price, but private tuition company, private therapist, what this would cost. And the why I mention that is because, of course, your child's needs should not be about money. But if anybody's had any dealings with the local authority, they know that the local authority's primary concern is budget protection. So if your child has been attending a school, particularly a more expensive school or with a high level of provision, and you want your child to have education otherwise than at school, then as well as the legal test that they should consider, or even before then, a primary consideration for the local authorities agreement is going to be how much is it going to cost? Now that shouldn't be the consideration, but that will be a consideration. So if you do a costed package and it comes out to not much more than, or less even sometimes, than the school placement that they would otherwise be naming, then that can often tip the balance in terms of local authority agreement. But what's the actual legal test for when education otherwise than at school is to be provided? Well, it's set out in Section 61 of the Children and Families Act, which I've copied in full there. But the important point is that the local authority is only required to make an education otherwise than at school package of provision available by way of an EHC plan if it's satisfied that it would be inappropriate for provision to be made for a child at a school. So that doesn't mean any school in the whole country, but it does mean kind of any reasonably locally accessible school. So taking into account maintained mainstream schools, specialist schools, independent, specialist or ordinary schools, etc. And so that's the legal test. So you have to demonstrate that no school that's reasonably accessible locally would be suitable for your particular child. And in practice, how do you do that? Well, you request an EOTAS package at the earliest stage possible, but certainly at draft plan stage if it's a new EHCP, or an annual or emergency review if the child already has an EHC plan. And so you ask the local authority for it at that stage. And like I say, if you present a timetable and costed provision arrangements, then that's likely to be a really helpful way forward. If the local authority agrees, as I say, the EOTAS package will be written into section F of the EHC plan, and section I will remain blank because there's no placement to be attended. If the local authority, when you request, decides to refuse an EOTAS package, then your remedy is to appeal to the first tier tribunal, sometimes known as SENDIAS, or the SEND tribunal. And what's really important to note here is that about 2/3 of all cases that are appealed are settled without actually ever going to hearing. So that's a very high proportion, and that means that it's settled in a way that's suitable to the parents. Of those 1/3 that go to hearing, around 92% are successful, which means that almost all of the decisions that are made that are appealed were originally wrong decisions by the local authority in the first place. And that should give you hope, because it means that if you appeal, and sometimes an appeal is just like a declaration that you mean what you say when you're dealing with the local authority, then you have a good prospect of achieving your EOTAS package. So evidence is key, and persistence is key if you find yourself in a dispute with the local authority. Essential to that is gathering evidence. You do that by making subject access requests. You're entitled to all data held about your child from school, from the local authority, as well as lots of other places. And so you do that by simply sending an email saying, please can you provide, this is a subject access request, please provide me with all the data you hold about my child. And the reason you might do that is because you might find really helpful data and evidence in there, in things like minutes of meetings in which your child's been discussed, and internal emails between staff, risk assessments and things like that, which actually supports the case for school being inappropriate for your child to attend. Any involved medical professionals or other professionals like social workers, for example, can write supportive, helpful letters. But really crucial is independent expert evidence. If it's financially feasible, from an educational psychologist, that's the most important one, then occupational therapist, speech and language therapist. If your child has complex physical needs, also maybe a physiotherapist. This can be funded privately, it's very expensive. It can be funded by legal help, which is a form of legal aid from lawyers who have a legal aid contract. If subject to means testing, you usually have to have quite a low income and limited capital. And there's also a great charity called Parents in Need, and that provides funding for parents on, and I believe it's still means tested, but kind of for parents that don't meet the threshold for legal aid. They can provide support to parents that qualify for their support with that. In an appeal, you can ask the tribunal judge to direct the local authority to arrange assessments and things. But really important that the quality of the evidence that you collect must be tribunal standards. So it has to be robust and very specific and quantified. This child needs 25 hours one-to-one tuition in these subjects, for example, or 45 minutes weekly of occupational therapy. And the expert has to be experienced and in going and willing to attend tribunal, because otherwise you might get a beautiful report from an EP who doesn't attend tribunals, and then you have to go to appeal, and then you find the local authority has a barrister and 3 experts, local authority or NHS EPs and OTs, etc., and you have no witnesses to argue, which is a real disadvantage when you're in a situation that's the battle of the experts, as in a SEN appeal. So I've talked to you about a number of different strands of education, law, and needs that kind of combine for your children. I've talked about what EOTAS isn't, and then I've talked about what it is. If you are in a situation where you're in a dispute with the local authority or you're struggling to find your way forward, there are excellent charities, IPSI and SOSN, that provide support to parents trying to navigate these systems, and also they provide quite helpful online material. And I've already mentioned Parents in Need and legal aid lawyers who may be able to help. And so really my parting comment is, as somebody who spent an awful lot of time out of school and then went on to, as a teenage mum, I should add, to get a first-class degree in law and qualify as a lawyer at the age of 25. Not going to school doesn't necessarily do children any harm at all. Receiving the right support that they need at the right time can be hugely transformative and beneficial.
Thank you, Tracy. So, yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Bright Heart. Thank you for having me here today. And I'll look to provide some detail about what we see from our side, and also a bit of background to Bright Heart. Obviously, I don't want this to be a sales pitch. It's not, but I will provide just some context there. And then also some of the services that we provide, and yeah, maybe just some tips as well, what we see as well in this process. So with respect to us, a lot of my experience actually was I started 12 years ago tutoring for a number of other agencies in London, and with my background is actually chemical engineering, and I was assigned to do maths and science for various students, and I would often arrive there to work with students to find like, well, this is completely not what I expected. I'm there ready to do a topic or a worksheet or talk about an aspect of education, and this young person is not really ready for that, and there was no real detail about the young person's needs or their interests, or more of a background about why they may be out of education or not enjoying education currently. So often I was thrown into the deep end into these situations, and I guess learning the hard way across a range of needs, and seeing that really it was the knowledge that I had in my head about maths or science was often of secondary importance in the beginning. That it was about establishing a welcoming space, a positive, gentle space. Really looking to understand that young person on an individual level, and seeing more about them, why they were potential blocks to educational learning, or being in the mainstream environment, and then really seeing how they like their learning environment, how they like to learn, what actually got them interested, or what do they like to talk about. These sort of things were very important for gaining trust, and what I saw that many young people had a sense of abandonment or felt their trust was broken, and it was about regaining that, and that relationship then could be used to build on for an academic learning. So it's not like academic outcomes were forgotten, but it was more really establishing a good emotional base, a good basis for understanding and working with the young person, and then to bring in academic demands from there. So that grew, and then really got chatting with a friend and current business partner now at Simon McQueen, and another South African actually, and I went to school with him actually in high school, so we've known each other quite some time, and we launched Bright Heart in 2018, and really with a view to have this ethos and space for young people, which we thought was missing, and put that on a larger deliver that on a larger scale, really. And certainly, there's to many of you, this will not be rocket science. You can see some of this in the SEND code of practice and person-centered working. There's also good alignment with some of the work of Carl Rogers in personal psychology. He saw in his own practice when he worked with his patients that when what he called unconditional positive regard, when he employed that with his patients, he saw a much higher success rate. And we just say warmth, really, and we look to have tutors who embody that, or have a more of a, also what we describe as a more nurturing approach. Not to say that we always get the fit right every time. There are personality differences, but this is really where we're coming from. That for many children, they've been through a tough time, and they need someone who's a bit more sensitive to that. So we've grown a bit from there, from Southwest London, and certainly I was tutoring a lot around Merton when I was working as a full-time tutor, and also worked at a school for a year. We've got education consultants and client managers now, and tutor managers. So the team has grown, and we work with a number of local authorities across London. We're still growing a bit more into East London and North London, but we also see a range of behavior as well from some local authorities, and also some of the strain that they're under, which is not always something that we wish to account for when our own child is under pressure or not receiving education, but certainly we can see that there's strain in the system. With respect then to our clients, we work with private parents, and that can be tutoring after school or weekends, and then as well as homeschooling, and then also EOTAS packages. So that in combination with local authorities. We also provide interim education with for local authorities where they're seeking usually a school place for a young person, and then also with schools that can be one-to-one for where children aren't attending school, and there's EHCP money that the school has to apply. Schools contact us, and we look to provide that. We also work with the National Tutoring Program, providing small group tuition. But really with local authorities, that's really where the EOTAS package comes from, and there naturally is as many of you know, it's not a straightforward process, but also as Eva said, it's about persistence. And what we see is that many of the parents who keep going, they get there, and the system can sometimes be, I know, hard on one's own mental health as a parent, when there sometimes can be appeals denied or on the last day of term. But what I've seen, and I've attended also tribunals, that when a judge is there, then the law still holds, and the local authority must deliver. That being said, we see caseworkers with 180 cases who are struggling with their own mental health. We work with local authorities where they say, this is the cake and we can't divide it anymore. But from seeing what happens in tribunals, and thankfully in this country as well, where the law supports a child, we do see packages going through which certainly can account for many services to support that young person. Just with respect to the journey, as Eva mentioned, the HCP, it's always good to get that going straight away. So this is not a ticket to your EOTAS, a guarantee to your EOTAS, but you need it to get your EOTAS. And then with respect to the actual support package, we see parents who they may be sometimes asking for a package which is more likely to be turned down because there's too many bells and whistles. And that's not to say that a young person shouldn't be getting extra therapies and support. We see that the therapies are in there and they do get approved, but we sometimes see packages where they have a number of things attached to them, and without strong arguments for them, and then unfortunately it means there's a higher chance of them not going through. But naturally, a solicitor can guide you on that. A key thing is that once you've got that EHCP, is that Section F and the delivery and execution of that. And you may think that you've got that final EHCP and the battle has been won, but in some ways the battle has just begun, because you need to get that implemented, and that requires good and constant communication with your caseworkers and the local authority. And I also understand it's natural when the emotions of your own child to be that it can often be very polarized. And I would still say to try and work with that EHCP caseworker as well as possible, and the local authority, that you still are acting professionally and you got reasonable arguments. Sometimes we see, cases where naturally human emotions come into play, and which can then unfortunately diminish the actual legal arguments and education for that child. Accountability. So, with respect to that, it's important to still ask for annual reviews and to make sure that there are various timelines that you wish to see at a certain time, that that the goals implemented by a certain date. If the local authority is often not hearing from the parent, then they won't put in an annual review. So you have to keep asking. And sometimes it's hard for us as a provider that we're trying to manage what the local authority is saying and what they can deliver and what the parent is asking for. We can't ask for things on behalf of the parent, but we can certainly provide guidance to the parent to what they can ask for. So just in terms of our services, we have grown a bit further, and we are bringing on more education consultants as well to help with local authorities. We provide some guidance in that EHCP process. So my colleague John Salmon is very knowledgeable on that, and we've actually done we've got some resources on our website for that. We're happy to provide that. That's no charge to that, and then for parents, we also offer a consultation to hear more about their child and the child's education, and really understand the situation in a better way, so we can provide effective outcomes. Often we see, and what I experienced also when I was working as a tutor, that there can be superficial solutions to education issues, and we really believe that a more sustainable approach is only going to work. That you have to look at the child's well-being and a person as a whole, really, for there to be a long-term solution. After that consultation, we can prepare a proposal which can be sent to a local authority, which would be, how we're going to support that young person, and as well as including costing for that. We for parents, some parents realize payments, a direct payment method, so they're able to handle their own finances and pay a provider from money they receive for the EOTAS package. There are advantages to that the parent has more control of the money and how they use it, but also they aren't able to claim VAT. So we are able to charge the local authority, ex VAT, and then the local authority can reclaim the VAT back, whereas a parent can't do that. So that's just something to bear in mind if you are going after the direct payment method from a local authority, that they can be high tuition rates. But that again depends on the tuition company. There are some tuition companies there which do not charge VAT, and this all comes back to a few years ago when the government decided to go after more of the gig economy to chase taxes. And it all depends on how much you're involved with your tutors and providing a ethos and support for them, and whether you just an introductory service. If you're just an introductory service, then you don't need to charge VAT. So just to bear that in mind as what provider you're going with. But for someone like us, who like to be involved with the journey and have tutors who embody our brand and ethos, then we need to charge VAT, and that is reclaimable by the local authority. With respect to the tutor matching, we do our best to find tutors which would fit with the personality and the interests and the subjects that the young person is doing. So we do spend time on that. It's not always easy sometimes to find experts in a particular area who have, for example, experience in autism and sociology or geography. But we certainly recruit. We're growing our pool. We have about 150 tutors, and we certainly will look to provide any subject and school subject that you're seeking, as well as we provide subjects such as through UAS units, award units, and AQA schemes, as well as ASDAN. So we are able to provide other courses and subjects to help towards foundational skills and enable young persons still to get a qualification. We see it still as an educational journey, that this is something that we're along for the ride for, and there's a education consultant and an individual learning plan to support the young person during that time. And what is really positive, and also I guess part of the reason why Bright Light was launched, is that it's very rewarding to see young people who weren't coping well in a mainstream situation suddenly blossom in an environment which is much more suitable to their needs, and seeing them do well. So yeah, that's really the most of what we offer, but we're happy to chat more about. You can get in touch with us via email, on our website, or give us a call. We certainly see the strain that some parents are under, and we're always happy to chat to parents to see how we can help in that process, if it's an EHCP or a proposal that they want to send to a local authority. And we're happy to chat further, and certainly understand that it's not an easy situation that parents are in, but also we see parents come through with persistence and really achieve packages and which account for all subjects and homeschooling, sometimes up to 25, 30 hours even, along with therapies. So there are those packages coming through. We would just say be mindful of what you're asking for, that it's reasonable and the arguments behind it. So yeah, thank you as well for your time, and happy to answer any questions.
Hi everybody, hopefully you can all see and hear me. My name is Fiona Ringwood. I'm parent of a now 27-year-old young autistic young man with autism, who also has dyspraxia, auditory processing disorder, and some aspects of PDA. He was in mainstream primary up to 11. He then went to a specialist residential school in Dorset from 11 to 16, and then transferred to a specialist residential college from 16 to 18. The placement broke down towards nearly at the end of his time there. He was actually one of the first young people to have an education healthcare plan transferred over from Statement in 2014, which was when the first EHC plans were used. So in 2015, he was due to leave his college, and unfortunately the placement broke down. It just didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't work for him. So we had to have him back at home. And we didn't get much notice. Like 2 days before the end of the spring term, they wanted him out, so we had to have him back at home. So we had nowhere for him to go. What we were going to do, we'd had a look at alternative provisions, but at that time there wasn't much provision post-19, because obviously the EHCP plans had only just come into being, and the provision being extended up to 25. So very few colleges had actually got any provision post-19. So we were like, oh, what do we do now? My son's quite intellectually able. He's got high functioning. He'd wanted to do GCSEs at school and college, but they didn't have facilities for him to do them. So it was a bit frustrating for him, and I think that was where a lot of the problems lay when he was at college. So we were thinking, well, maybe he could do some GCSEs at home. And the local authority were actually quite happy to provide sort of emergency tutoring at that stage. So he had a few hours a week doing core subjects. And that's where we met Ryan. Ryan was actually working for a different agency at that point, but Ryan came on board and he taught Oliver maths and some sort of general science subjects. And we also got another couple of tutors to do things like English and history and things like that. But so for the first sort of the summer term, he was just having tutoring until we could get a new EHCP with all the subjects within his final EHC plan. So I didn't really know anything about EOTAS at the time, and I, because of the change was going on with post-19 up to 25, and the fact that he wanted to do academic subjects, I basically went out and did my own plan for curriculum for him. He chose what subjects he wanted to do for GCSEs. I found Harrison Allen Tutoring Company and got various tutors to do subjects. I think he had about 12, 14 hours a week at that point, and we were just doing, he was just doing academic subjects. And then I realised that he needed more than just, just learning for GCSEs. So I found, my friend is actually a cookery teacher, so she did some cookery lessons with him, and I then managed to get that a couple of hours a week doing cookery built into his EHCP plan. I was also working with the Autism Trust, who are based in Camberley, and they do a post-16 work experience training centre for young people with autism. And we managed to get him into a programme which it's an employability skills programme run by ASDAN. I'm not sure whether any of you have heard of ASDAN, but that's the programme that we put together. So I did the whole package, I costed it all out, I took it to his annual review, and because obviously he'd been in out of borough specialist residential before, that was a very expensive package for local authority. My package, which I'd costed, was inevitably a lot less expensive, shall we say. So they were quite willing to put this in place for him. But a lot of the work, it was down to me to plan it, to run his curriculum, to make sure he was having sufficient break times. Again, his focus wasn't very good, so we had to build in a lot of breaks and rest periods for him. But I would say that the opportunities are not just for academics. A lot of young people with SEND don't want to explore academia. They don't learn very well. They might not have cognitive abilities and not interested in the whole point that being in school didn't suit them, was because they didn't want to learn academic subjects. So trying to find out non-academic activities for them is quite important. If they're particularly sporty, doing independent living skills, things like learning how to do the laundry. These are all sorts of things you can do in the home as well. But if you can find a course that would help them learn independent living skills, my son did that when he was at the Autism Trust. He did an ASDAN course, and I've got the book here, which is, I don't know if you can see it. It's a focus course which is run by ASDAN on independent living skills, and they do all sorts of things like cleaning, doing laundry, and it's all broken down into tiny little steps, so everything is really, really clear for them to do. Arts and crafts, if they're interested in those, and just sort of general health and well-being, getting out in the fresh air, going for walks, visiting museums, anything that if it sparks their interest, is a much healthier way for them to learn than sitting at a desk or in front of a computer. And it's just it's better for their mental health, I believe. They can gain some work if they're older. I mean, I'm focusing more on post-18 because obviously that's where I have experience. Maybe there are local charities or places where they can gain some work experience. It doesn't have to be for very long. The MenCap run a scheme in their cafe where young people with learning disabilities can learn to work in a cafe and doing hospitality. So it's trying to find areas and maybe local charities or groups where they can learn those sorts of skills. There's also volunteering. There are many charities that will take volunteers, and this can be a really good place for them to learn building up their social skills, just generally learning about the outside world. And also there, obviously, if they want to do further academic or vocational studies, they can do the ASDAN courses. I heard Brian mention that they run ASDAN. They didn't do that when Oliver was doing it, but if you can find a centre that will do ASDAN courses, they're really, really beneficial, and they're all vocational. They're all aimed at non-academic subjects, so they can learn things like travel training, horticulture, gardening, all those sorts of subjects, animal care, things that are not necessarily academically based, and just provide much more interest for them. And also functional skills. My son didn't do wouldn't have been able to manage GCSE English, so he did functional skills, which is much more geared to real life. I believe some of the functional skills courses are more geared to real life. Okay, next one. All right. So this is just a little bit from ASDAN's website about what their mission is, and they specifically concentrate on young people from 11 to 25 who've got various diverse needs, and they have a massive program of, seriously recommend going on their website, because they have a lot of a wide range of courses, either short courses or longer ones. The same, my son did a 3-year employability skills, but we were able to extend the course according to his needs. So it may, some pupils may be able, or students may be able to do it in a shorter period of time, but my son needed that long time to actually process all the information, gain the experience, and that's how long it took. So it took as long as it took for him. Okay, thank you. All right, so if you need the sort of options there are. So home education, I mean, I was very lucky in that I work from home, and Oliver's dad is retired, so we were able to organise the tutoring programme for him to do at home. There are numerous tutoring agencies, Bright Heart being one of them, and we were very lucky that we had Ryan right from the word go, right up until my son did his A-levels. He did actually do 2 A-levels, but I would say about the A-levels, Ryan is correct. Oliver, my son, sorry, he needed 3 years to do his A-level chemistry, because 2 years would have been too much for him to fit in. It took that long for him to process all the information, and it wasn't too pressurized. And that's, you have that capability. If you're running your child's own program, you can say, oh, well, he's going to take more than 2 years to do a GCSE or 2 years to do an A-level. And you can run the program at their own pace, which I think is really, really important. If you're doing home education, there is a home education advisory service, and they have a website, and they've got lots of information about running home ed programs. There are lots of Facebook groups run by parents who home educate. Really good to get involved with one of them, because they very often have meetups, because they can be quite isolating for parents and for young people if they're learning at home and they don't necessarily have a lot of contact with their peer groups, although in my son's case that wasn't really an issue. But yeah, it's quite important to have for your own mental health, to actually have contact with other parents who are going through the same things. So there's quite a lot of Facebook groups out there in various areas. There was a lot of focus in the chat about exams. My son did GCSEs. At that time, he did his GCSEs. I think he was about 20 when he did them. There weren't many places where you could do it. They would take external candidates for GCSEs, and I did struggle a bit to find somewhere that would do it. Used to be some of the secondary schools local, would accept private candidates, and we actually got an invigilator from one of them to come to the house to do his history GCSE. But I found that actually that was quite difficult to get in the future, and fewer schools that were doing that would provide that. That might be easier now, but certainly at the time I found that was quite tricky. But there is a company who operate in Wimbledon called Tutors and Exams, and they're very good. My son did most of his GCSEs and A-levels with Tutors and Exams, and they have an exam centre in Wimbledon, bottom of the Broadway. And he was assessed for access arrangements, and he got extra time. He got a scribe because he has dyspraxia, so he struggles with handwriting quickly. So he had a scribe. He had the ability to use a laptop, and you include the funding for the exams, because when you do private exams as an external candidate, they are quite expensive. So you have to make sure that the funding, the costs for the exams are included in the EHCP package. It's quite important that, including things like having a laptop, because those are all extra costs, and if they have a scribe, there's extra costs. So make sure that you're aware of all these extra little costs. and make sure that they're included in the package, EOTAS package for your EHCPs. There's also another company called Farigos. They have they're a home education exam centre, and they're based in Hampshire. But they have a Facebook page, so it's worth going on there and having them. It's really important to get your exam applications in really early, because, for instance, for a GCSE, you'd need to get the application to do the GCSE in like the previous November for a May exam, or February for a May exam. So it's really, really important that you're aware of timescales and make sure that you get their applications in, especially if they need additional access arrangements, because that often takes more time. Okay, next one. What have I done? Oh yeah, independent living skills. Okay, so these are the sort of things I touched on earlier. Cooking, meal preparation, budgeting, doing laundry, learning how to clean. Very often, young people who don't have special educational needs don't know how to operate the washing machine, don't know how to clean, tidy and hoover, or cook a simple meal. And I think all these skills are really important for everybody, not just young people with special educational needs. So children and young people should be learning to do these things, whether at home or in school anyway. I think it's quite important. So that they can, you know, hopefully at some point in the future, they're able to live independently and look after themselves. And that's really important. So even if you can get hold of one of the courses and do maybe do some things at home, have some resources, plenty of online resources, YouTube videos, specifically for young people with SEN, which will break down the task into small pieces, and then they can learn how to do things very, very gradually. So I think that's quite important. Even if you do this from home, make it a fun thing to do. Try not to make it just sitting down learning things from a sheet. Planning and organisational skills, they're quite important. My son really struggles with planning timetables and having to have things in quite a strict routine. So those sorts of things you can get help with, say, via ASDAN. They do a really good course for that, about planning their time. And that's really, really important, I think, for a lot of young people who tend to be able to plan their time. Okay, next one. Oh yes, and travel, if they can't travel independently, things like planning a journey. And I know MenCap do travel training. So if they need that sort of thing, that's another aspect that they can do, which is not an academic study. They can have support doing planning a journey and travel training. The Merton offer page on the local offer page on the Merton website has also got lots of information about activities and leisure, things that are not academic subjects, things like drama, clubs, groups, holiday activities. One thing I did actually make sure when I was doing the plan was to make sure that they had time built in for the holidays, the school holidays. So my son had to have PA support, because I couldn't support him in his out of the house activities. And if he went to cooking, for example, he needed PA support to accompany him, to be there while he was having the cooking lesson and to bring him home. So make sure that you build your cost in, find out costs for hiring a PA to accompany your young person if they need to have go outside and do activities in the community. It's really important that you actually get either children with disabilities team or the transitions team with adult social care. Make sure you get them on board, get a social care assessment if they're over 18. So and get them involved with education as well, because you know, as Eva said, there are very often conflicts between adult social care and education about who's going to pay for what. So it's really, really important that you get, you know, if your young person is doing a home tutoring, if they're going out to do an activity outside the house and they need PA support, that you make sure you have that in place. Get a needs assessment done by social care. Get PA support. Find out how much it's going to cost and make sure it's included within your EOTAS package, and that's quite important. So yeah, make it fun. Education doesn't mean sitting at a desk, it's getting out, visiting. I mean, you know, I was very lucky in that I could work my self-employed hours around my son's activities and make sure going out visiting. There's plenty of free activities out there. Go visit museums, go into your library. So if we don't use our library facilities, we'll use them. Merton's got a very good library. We lived in lots of parks, so we had West Barnes Library, there's one in Waynes Park, and I'm sure there's lots of other libraries around the borough. So use those, because if we don't use the facilities, we'll very often lose them. If you've got a young person with disabilities in Merton, there's the M card, which gives you access to a lot of entry to a lot of attractions, and you know, visiting parks and farms, and the Dean City Farm, obviously, in Merton, that you know, the young people can access. Lots of visitor attractions. If you have DLA, if your young person has DLA, they can entitle a carer to free entry. So always remember those. Just go for a walk. Go to the park, go for a walk, explore nature. There's loads of online resources for arts and crafts, so printing out pictures, colour, finding out craft activities for them to do. I'm very interested in gardening, as probably most of the people know who know me. So I encourage young people to do gardening activities. It's something that we did at the Autism Trust. We had young people sowing seeds. You know, it's a learning activity for science. It's a learning activity for you know, studying the environment, and it's fun. You know, using recycling containers from the house to make to grow plants and sow seeds. Cooking and baking within the house is a really, if you can do it within the home, is a really useful and it's a fun activity to do with them as well. So yeah, just try and make it fun, much fun as you can.